I know I gave it months ago. I know you're trying to forget. I know I gave it months ago. I know you're trying to forget. I know I gave it.
In 1764, British Parliament passed the Sugar Act, which replaced the Sugar and Molasses Act of 1733. The Sugar and Molasses Act wasn't strictly enforced, but the Sugar Act would be strictly enforced. Under the Sugar and Molasses Act, the tax was 6 pence per gallon, and under the Sugar Act, it was 3. The Sugar Act put a tax on more foreign goods like sugar, wines, and coffee. The colonists were outraged because the markets they could sell to were limited. The Sugar Act restricted trade with Madeira, the Azores, the Canary Islands, and the French West Indies. This was a problem because all of the farm products that the South produced couldn't be sold to these important ports. This act was passed to pay for defense from the Indians along the frontier. The Proclamation of 1763 prevented colonial settling along the frontier. The colonists felt that the Sugar Act was unnecessary because they were paying for defense on an area that they weren't permitted to.
And whereas it is just and reasonable and essential to our interests and the security of our colonies that the several nations or tribes of Indians with whom we are connected and who live under our protection should not be molested or disturbed in the possession of such parts of our territories as not having been ceded to or purchased by us are reserved to them.
In 1765, British Parliament made its first serious attempt to assert governmental authority over the colonists by passing the Stamp Act. Great Britain faced a great national debt following the Seven Years' War, and taxes were placed on stamps that were required to be placed on certain printed documents. Then, colonists met for the Stamp Act Congress, which was the first significant joining of the colonies as a response to the actions of the British Parliament. Colonists protested this tax, and the act was repealed in 1766.
No more tax! 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 No more tax!
In 1770, a street fight occurred between a patriot mob and a group of British soldiers. The mob threw snowballs, stones, and sticks at the soldiers. The presence of British soldiers in Boston was not welcomed by the colonists. The British soldiers fired into the crowd and killed 5 people and injured 6. A meeting was called demanding the removal of British troops and a trial for the British soldiers. John Adams defended the British soldiers in court.
The Tea Act was passed in 1773 and restricted trade to the East India Company. The colonists were outraged and felt that the British were being too controlling of the colonists by restricting who they could trade with. This directly led to the Boston Tea Party. Sons and Daughters of Liberty boarded East India Company ships dressed as Indians and poured all of the tea on the ships into the Boston harbor. The Boston Tea Party was a key event leading up to the Revolution. Parliament was so outraged that they passed the Intolerable Acts in 1774. The Intolerable Acts closed Boston Harbor to merchant shipping, established British military rule in Massachusetts, made British officials immune to persecution in America, and required colonists to quarter British troops.
Go!
Common Sense by Thomas Paine was published in 1776. It challenged the authority of the British government. Paine used plain language that would appeal to the common people. He argued that it was common sense that we separate from Great Britain. It listed the advantages that would come from declaring independence from Great Britain. This pamphlet inspired the colonists in the 13 colonies to declare independence from the monarchy in Great Britain.
Society is produced by our wants, and government by wickedness. The former promotes our happiness positively by uniting our affections. The latter negatively by restraining our vices. The one encourages intercourse, the other creates distinctions. The first is a patron, the last a punisher.
Okay. If you're gonna dance, you gotta be on beat.